Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 168. This will be a special Gimmel Tammuz edition, being that this Tuesday is the 23rd, I don't like to use anniversary, but 23rd year marking the Gimmel Tammuz of Tov Schlomit. We'll also dedicate this MyLife episode in loving memory of Reb Simon Jacobson, or Jacobson, originally known as Yakubashvili, whose Yacht is on the 2nd of Taamuz, tonight, passed away in Tov Shin Yud Gimmel, 1953, dedicated by his grandson Yerachmiel Jacobson and family. He's also my grandfather and my namesake. He was one of the 10 people who the Frierdiker Rebbe made a Krisis Bris, a covenant with, that they would do everything in their power, to the last drop of blood, to preserve Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs in the former Soviet Union. I have to remember 1923 or 1924, when this covenant, this pact was made, was one of the most dangerous times in Jewish history, especially for Eden in that part of the country. And most of those 10 people were killed as soon as they were found out. My grandfather was arrested and sent off to Siberia, did come out ultimately after World War II, and finally made it to Toronto, where he passed away in Tov Shin Yud Gimmel. It's not a place to go speak about that right now. That's not the occasion. This is not the time for it. But being that it's his yard site, this program is dedicated to that. And Beis Tammuz, of course, leads into Gimmel Tammuz. And of course, this is also the month of Yud Beis, Yud Gimmel Tammuz, which also begins with Gimmel Tammuz. As the Rebbe would refer to Gimmel Tammuz all the years as Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Because as we know, the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested and in prison. They sentenced him to death. That sentence and verdict was commuted on Gimmel Tammuz to 2 years in Golus, 3 years in Golus and Kastrama, that he would live in a distant land. And that was what Gimmel Tammuz was. Then, within 9 days later, on Yud Beis Tammuz and Yud Gimmel Tammuz, the news came, and finally he was released completely without any punishment at all. And that would lead, of course, so that led to the Geula, the complete Geula. So for us Chassidim, when we look at Gimmel Tammuz now, Tov Shin Dalet, with the Rebbe, we obviously cannot ignore the Gimmel Tammuz connected to Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz. So let's speak a few words about Gimmel Tammuz and how we should look at it. How are we to look at Gimmel Tammuz? What lessons does it contain for us? Is there any precedent to Gimmel Tammuz? A few people write different questions, and let me read some questions. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson, standing just a few days before Gimmel Tammuz. We all have strong feelings and yearnings for the Rebbe, and we all miss him immensely. I can really only speak for myself. I merited to see the Rebbe and receive dollars from him, etc. My question to you basically is as follows. I have real problems in life. If I was able to go into Yechidus with the Rebbe, I would. That's a private audience with the Rebbe. Alternatively, if I was able to write him, I would do that and tell him my situation and ask him what to do. I'm familiar with the Rebbe's Sichos where he says we can connect to the Rebbe today as well. My question is, how do we make that connection real? So that when we go to the oil or write in the Igros Kodesh, we should feel connected with the Rebbe and get answers and solutions to our problems. Sometimes it feels like the story of the Alter Rebbe when he told the Chassidim that after he passes on, they won't be able to find his door in Gan Eden. Sometimes it feels like Chas v'Shalom, the Rebbe is not reachable. With prayers, we should have these galas of the Rebbe before Gimmel Tammuz. Another person writes, writing to the Rebbe. So let me read that as well, since it's fitting to this. My question relates to the circumstances and process with relation to writing to the Rebbe. Firstly, why do we write in? Is it simply an exercise in putting pen to paper to bring a sense of awareness to the issues we write in about? Or is there something deeper, the building of a relationship between myself and the Rebbe? Essentially, why do we need to write? Why can't we just think? Or even just say something with words? When do we write in? Under what circumstances is something appropriate for sharing with the Rebbe? I have read and heard stories of people writing regarding matters of life and death, business decisions, philosophy, but I've also heard stories of young children writing in just to share an achievement. Is sharing the parts of our lives that perhaps we're not proud of also appropriate to share with the Rebbe? Next question, how do we write in? What is the protocol for writing a letter to the Rebbe? If I'm writing just to share some news or ask a question with regard to direction in life, is there less of a preparation than if I was writing a pan, which is a pidyon nefesh. How does a pan differ from a regular letter? Finally, once a letter is written, to then what? Do I need to send it through, put it in a safer, tear it up? Another question regarding these issues, Rabbi Jacobson, a big yeshikoyach for your talks. I go to the oil once a week in addition to special days and occasions as a way of keeping my connection to the Rebbe. Can you please address, if you haven't yet, a bit of how to write appropriately to the Rebbe? Is there a difference between a pan or Erev Rosh Hashanah versus a general letter? Please provide some of your insight into the above topic. Thank you. Okay. Before I continue, I just want to refer to earlier episodes, which I often do. There's a lot of cross-referencing because we talk about similar topics. And Gimmel Tammuz has been a topic, obviously, on our minds and our discussions and on your minds. So episodes 19 through 24, you'll find discussions about Gimmel Tammuz. Episodes 71 and 72 and episode 121. This is from previous years. All these previous episodes of this program, MyLife, Chassidus Applied, can be found at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And you can find all the archives, literally from 1 till now. We're doing 168. And much of the discussions there are often more elaborate. And I tried to add here points here and there. But if you want a fuller picture, I would definitely recommend going there. But I will obviously answer these questions and add some points that perhaps were not discussed about earlier. Unfortunately, we still have to deal with this dilemma called Gimmel Tammuz. That's the euphemism, the word that we use. And perhaps that itself reflects why do we use such a word, because we don't know what to do with this day. On one hand, the Rebbe is not here physically with us. On the other hand, we believe firmly that a Rebbe is a nitzchi, and as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in the Geras HaKedesh, that he was more present with us than ever before, but on a spiritual plane. Because the tzaddik's life is a life of spiritual life, which is ava, yira, or love and awe, and amunas Hashem. So how do we deal with this day? So let's share a few words. Firstly, let me begin with the most important thing. Gimmel Tammuz, I was not necessarily part of the plan. You don't find anywhere, obviously in retrospect, people try to find hints everywhere, but there was not something that was like, oh, okay, Gimmel Tammuz is coming and let's prepare for it. So it's not a problem to say that we don't understand exactly what Gimmel Tammuz is and what it means. That still doesn't mean that we don't have a job to do and that we're not fully connected. It's obviously a great nisayon and a great test, because when you don't have the Rebbe physically, that you could see him and you can relate to him and speak to him and dance on a kofis with him and see him blow shofar and come Yom Kippur, a regular mincha ma'ariv, a fabrengen HaShabbos, and all that came with it, dollars, keisha brachas. I'm going to go through the whole list of the Rebbe's interaction with the people. Obviously, that is physically not there. It's a tremendous nisayon. How do you hold on to something that's not tangible? That's not something you can easily relate to. You went to Fabrein, you knew for 4, 5, 6 hours, you were lifted up to another plane, to another dimension in the Rebbe's presence. Today it all has to be generated from within, which is far, far harder. So you have people who actually have big challenges, and say all of us have challenges, but some people have unfortunately succumbed to these challenges, which means you can lose hope, you can lose faith, it can weaken your faith. Not here to judge anyone. It's a reality that happens when, look, the Eden, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, they ended up building a Gegel Hazav because they miscalculated by 1 day and Moshe didn't arrive. 1 day. Here we're dealing with 23 years. So people can give up. People can become surrendered, can become resigned. And we know that. But we also know that that's not the kavanah. We also know that's not the purpose. The kavanah is that we should not succumb. So even if we have no answer, we still have much work to do to make sure we forge ahead with a complete faith, with a complete commitment, as if nothing had changed. So on one hand, we have that feeling, we see with our own eyes, it's not the same. On the other hand, how do we hold on that type of strength? So I want to begin with firstly a letter that is less, I've mentioned it several times on MyLife, but I think it's I find it very comforting in a paradoxical and ironic way. It's a letter written to Rabbi Avram Parij, who was a chassid of the Rebbe, of the Frierdiker Rebbe as well. He's famous, you hear about him in different places. And the Rebbe writes to him, is a response to him. This is in Igros Kodesh, volume 3, page 308. Okay, it's a letter of Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan Tov Shin Yud. So we're talking here, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, 4 months after Yud Shvat, Tov Schlomit of this Talkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the letter, the Rebbe writes to him that he received his letter, and he very much enjoyed, or nisi, enjoyed, you can say, or had anoah, I had pleasure, I had nachas, I'm not sure exactly how to translate it. What he wrote, that he wrote Zol Gesund sein, that the Rebbe should be well. On the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe should be well. And who move, and this is understood based on the Geras HaKedesh Simach of Zayin, the one I referred to earlier. Shachayet Tzadik Hem Ruchnim, Amunah V'Av V'Yireh. The life of a tzaddik is spiritual, amunah, faith and love and awe of God. V'Yadua Shatzadik Helech Machayel Al Choyel Tamid. We know a tzaddik continuously goes from strength to strength for always. Then the Rebbe continues, which is clearly a response to Rabbi Avrom's request about the Rebbe becoming Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes, what you write about me, I'll just translate it, I won't write originally, you can look it up, I said 308 in volume 3 of Igros Kodesh. What you write about me, what will help your writing? I don't have it for it. At the end of the day, I don't have it. And by myself, I don't need to find the Ramozim and Pirushim. The Rebbe was, of course, being humble, because at the end of the day, the Rebbe did accept the Nesias. But here's what I want to really read to you. After the Rebbe basically says to him, what are you telling me? It doesn't help your feelings about me. I have to feel that way. So the Rebbe is okay. Elo vosvet zayin. So the question is, vosvet zayin, what's going to be? If I don't, basically the Rebbe is saying, I'm not going to assume what's going to be. So the Rebbe says, is vos veisich? What do I know? Was the Rebbe tracht? What do I know what the Rebbe is thinking? He's talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe. Es ist sein Achrayis, it's his responsibility, that sicher versorgen. So he will definitely deal with it. He'll definitely resolve the issues. He'll worry about it. Wie sei weiß ich nicht. How, I don't know. Da noch Sachen, was ich weiß nicht. There's other things I don't know. What am I reading this? Because that tells you, here's the Rebbe himself, who later would assume the leadership. So you can imagine that the Rebbe, that he finally realized that he is the person, and that maybe is what the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted. He came to realize what but at that point the Rebbe is saying that what's going to be, I don't know, we have a Rebbe, and it's his problem, basically. It's his achrayis. How? I don't know, and there's other things I don't know. If the Rebbe could say that, we could also say that. Gimmel Tammuz, there is no answer for Gimmel Tammuz. People try to explain it, they could find this, find that. An answer? Why do we even have to look for an answer? Something happened, something mysterious, and like the Rebbe says, there's other things we don't know. At the same time, as we've talked about many times about the Holocaust or other matters, the fact that we don't know an answer to something does not in any way weaken the resolve and the commitment to do what we have to do. As the Rebbe writes in a letter to a doctor that I once cited here, a doctor who was talking about the Holocaust, the Rebbe said the fact that we don't know means we don't need to know. Because if God wanted us to know, if it was important for our work and serving God to know why it happened, God would have definitely told us. The fact that he didn't tell us means we don't need to know, but that doesn't mean we don't know what to do. So they're asking why, or they're asking what we are supposed to do about it. The Maragli made the mistake already when they started challenging the why. Why do we have to go into Eretz Yisrael? No one ever told them that they have the right to ask that. The question was how to go. So what we have is a situation, whether we like it or not, that we have to figure out the how, not the why. We don't know why. Someone has an answer that works for them, fine. But that's not the point of finding answers on a thing that perhaps will always elude us. So the question is, what are we supposed to do? So the Rebbe told us what we're supposed to do. He said, I give you the job. With my keiches, I'm giving you the strength to forge ahead, yes, and tut alles was you can, do everything you can to bring the Mashiach. May one or two or three of you put your heads together and figure out what to do, how to do, and what to do. We have our marching orders. You could say it's difficult. Yeah, so what you can do is one thing, as I said, either succumb to resignation, God forbid, or you can just be paralyzed and do nothing and become like, I don't throw up my hands and say, I don't know what to do. Or as some people say, maybe things changed. Or none of those are acceptable. Why they're not acceptable? Because the Rebbe said words. Rebbe's words live on. They live on, and the directives live on, and the instructions live on. and the world cannot get further from Mashiach. They can only get closer to Mashiach. Why the Gula didn't come yet, as the Rebbe said a number of times in the later years in Nun and Nun Aleph. Takakash, it's a question, but that doesn't mean we stop the work. And whatever reason, the Rebbe said, I did my part, you have to do your part. Your part means I'm giving you the strength to do your part. Not as some people misunderstand it grossly and think the Rebbe's dropping the ball or the Rebbe's relieving himself from responsibility. A Rebbe never A Rebbe never leaves his flock. So the only question is, what are we supposed to do to be kelim, to be containers for the blessings and the directives that we're given? Is it challenging? Yes, it's challenging. Are there questions? Yes, there are questions. But our job is to not allow that to affect our work. You're part of an army. The army has to continue doing a job. We can't say, you know what, I'll wait till the commander-in-chief reappears in a way that I can see him to wait what he has to say. He told us what he has to say. So I'm not here to preach to anyone. I'm not telling anyone to do what they should do. If you're asking how I understand learning Gimmel Tammuz in the context of all the Rebbe Sichos, in the context of all the Shluchos and missions we were given, it's exactly that. We don't make believe it didn't happen. It's painful personally and so on. I can speak for myself in saying that the relationship with the Rebbe, for me, was always one, the Rebbe's spiritual side, the Chaim Ruchnim. The physical was beautiful. The physical was beautiful to be with the Rebbe in a physical sense. But the Chaim Ruchnim is what made the Rebbe a Rebbe. And what makes the Rebbe a Rebbe? Isha Lakim, a person who's saturated through and through with Ava, Yira, and Amunah. A walking Ava, Yira, and Amunah. That's Chaim Ruchnim, even when he's a Neshama Beguv, before Gimmel Tammuz and before Chav Zayin Oder. So when you connect to that, that lives on. That lives on in the Torah, in the directives, and in the Ava, Yira, and the Amunah, because that does not die, God forbid. Is it a sign again? Of course, it's much easier when the Rebbe lifts everybody up on his wings in a very physical way. But that does not in any way take away from the reality of the mission and the reality of the objective and the reality that we must do something, more than something, whatever we can, to bring the Geula, which is through Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza. And we're told and promised that the world is ready and the world has become refined and receptive. Does it mean practically every person is doing it? Obviously not. But receptive and worthy and open to it is a very big difference than saying the world is not even ready or the world still needs a lot of work. Because it means it's just what's only missing is Mechusar Maisa. The only thing is missing are actions. And you see this. I can testify to this in my work, dealing with all different types of audiences and secular people who may have no understanding at all of the ideas of Torah, Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, Ruchnius, but there's an openness, receptivity. You say it the right way, you can change people's lives. Now, how much we have to do? Again, we were not told whether one person is going to tip the scale, whether two people will tip the scale, whether it's one action or two actions. But as long as we're here, and as long as God blesses us with the strength and the health and all the blessings of our time, it would be an absolute, I would say, merida. It would be an absolute disgrace, an absolute mutiny against the Rebbe, if you're a Chassid Rebbe, of not using those strengths and those gifts and the blessings of our freedoms. That we do not have to be worried about the gezeres that once existed, and the murderers and the expulsions and the killings that existed 100 years ago. That to use the blessings of our lives in the fullest sense of the word, to do whatever we can, using the technologies, the tools, the platforms, that is the mission. So no one can say we can't do it. We have all the tools available to us, everything that ever predicted. So what are we doing? To sit saying, I'm resigned, or maybe the time has passed and now we're back to square one, is definitely not fulfilling the Rebbe's directive. That's allowing your seichel and your resistance and your feelings to get in the way. That is not acceptable. Now again, when I say it's not acceptable, it's not like I'm saying, I'm telling you it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in principle of the whole Rebbe's approach of what he taught us to do. So Gimmel Tammuz has to be a catalyst, a motivator of getting us to generate from within and self-initiate as much as we can efforts to be creative, to look for ways to do something in that regard. And that you need to learn the Sichos and the Maimorim and these directives that the Rebbe gave us, how to speak to people. Wherever you go, you're an ambassador of the Rebbe, you're an ambassador of teaching Chassidus and illuminating the world with Torah, and mitzvahs and Chassidus, and illuminating the whole world, including the non-Jewish world, to tzedek v'yesha, to justice and virtue in every possible way. And we all have our spheres of influence. We all have people we can reach, and that's our work. Questions? Fine. You can ask questions or you don't ask questions, but action and the effort cannot stop, cannot cease, cannot in any way pause or slow down in any way. On the contrary, we need to even accelerate it even more than ever. That God Almighty, 23 years have already passed. So that is one key approach to all of this. As far as the questions that are asked here about, is there a precedent? Well, there's no precedent because we always had a Nasi. It's a Deir Hashvi, all the Nasim existed, one is without a hefsek between one Nasi and the next. Are there precedents before the Baal Shem Tov? Perhaps. That can be discussed and argued. I'm not going to go speculate now on that. Regardless, I don't have a problem saying there's no precedent. And for some reason, there's this final step, the final frontier, maybe that Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei, that is only possible in such a situation, unfortunately, where the Rebbe is physically not even there to watch us, and we have to rely that he's watching us from Beruchnius. Maybe that, like the Rebbe says, Hishayin Rabba Mem Daled, when he spoke and he said, maybe he said, what's the reason for all this in concealment? He says, maybe the only reason is in order to maybe you need the complete concealment in order to cry with the truth, cry with the sincerity, because as long as there's giluyim, it's not completely coming from the depths of the heart. Whereas when there's a concealment of this nature, you finally see maybe this is like the final frontier. After the years and years of refining the world and the zichuch, refining and elevating the world, you come back to the tzimtzum addition. Tzimtzum addition is a big black hole, which can make you think, like in the mashal of the Schwindel trap of the Baal Shem Tov, the swindling staircase, a spiral staircase, that right before you reach the peak, you have to turn your back and you don't see it. Pani alai eiref, as Chassidus interprets, that you're standing right near it, but you're facing with your back to the goal, to the treasure. So perhaps that's the final turn. Maybe that's, again, not explaining Gimmel Tammuz, but it's just saying that's what are required then is to overcome that concealment and not be nespoiled from it, not allow it to impact us in any given way. As far as writing to the Rebbe, these are questions that are relevant all the time. Yes, a pan is a formal way of writing to the Rebbe. You write Pidyon Nefesh, and you write your name, and then whatever blessings you're looking for. That's a formal thing. People wrote that like a pan before Rosh Hashanah, on their birthdays, or other specific days. Some people write a pan more often, but you could also write a letter to the Rebbe that's a less formal letter. It doesn't hurt to write it as a pan, and then obviously after the initial line that I just said, you can go on and write about whatever it is that's the issues. I don't know if there's a black and white guideline or rules to exactly what you include in a pan, whether you write only the life and death issues or big issues, or you can write personal issues as well. I think this is every person according to their comfort zone. Some people did write to the Rebbe very detailed, but I think it's important to also be honest. To start writing to the Rebbe every detail of your life means that you're going to commit in all ways, so then you have to live up to that. You can't just write and not live up to it. A chassid who feels his entire life is 24/7 the Rebbe's under the Rebbe's control, then perhaps you write every detail. So I would think you do this with some moderation, with the mashpia's help, and obviously start with the most important things, and then you get to the less important things. I don't think everything has to be written, but again, this is a case-by-case determination. When do we write in? I would look at it like in context, as I said, there are special days. There's Gimmel Tammuz, of course. There's your birthday. There's Rosh Hashanah. There's other Yom Depagra, people's yard side of their parents, or other special days of the family. That's the given. If a person has a need, in particular middle of a Tuesday of a week, no one ever says you can't write. There's no limits in writing that way. How do we write in? So as I said, there's a protocol, but afterwards you can, it's like in anything in davening, you say the right words, you say Shema and so on, but then you can add your thoughts and writing anything you like to write. Why do we write and not just think? Well, writing has a certain tangibility to it. It concretizes it. And it's also certain that it's a commitment. When I say something to you and it's not in writing, it's almost like not really fully committed to. We say put it in a contract, put it in writing. There's a certain commitment when it's in written form. In addition, it seems that Ksav has a certain power, like in Teresh Ksav, the written word, writing to the Rebbe in his room, so he should read it, fine. But even when you went into Yechidus, people wrote things even though they spoke about them as well. But I think the most important thing is that it brings it down into a concrete fashion, more than just a thought and more than just speaking. It brings it into machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh, because obviously when you write, you have your thought and speech as well. Plus, the written really all three levushim are then used toward committing to the Rebbe, whatever it is the person is writing. What also a question that I did not address here? I think really I covered it. Okay. Well, above all, let us use this day Gimmel Tammuz in the fullest sense of the word. May we really be reunited with the Rebbe and all the Chassidim in the true sense of the word, begashmis and beruchnis. But the nitzchias remains on, and just as the nitzchias of Moshe Rabbeinu and all the Torah that lives on within us. And here, of course, it's our unique Der Ashvi and our particular and unique connection. Okay. Let us move to completely other topics, which are also obviously all under the banner of Chassidus Applied. So it's always in the context of Chassidus Applied and the Rebbe. So I'll go to a question, why is Lubavitch always different? Why is Lubavitch doing things differently? Jewish communities are often distinguished by their different minhagim. Yes, we have Nado, Pashta, which means each river spreads separately, and you find different customs. Sephardim and Ashkenazim, within themselves, there's different customs of different cities. And for different reasons, different customs evolved, particular needs of a particular community. But it seems that Lubavitch stands out in that it's always doing things differently than the rest of the Jewish world. Why? Another person writes, Dear Rabbi Jacobs and Shlita, thanks again for this great program. The reason for my writing today is because my son is beginning to learn for his bar mitzvah, and when buying tefillin, he heard how there is a ksav Alter Rebbe. Yes, a ksav, one of the way of writing of the Alter Rebbe opinion. And that brought up the question of why Lubavitch is always different. Our tefillin are different, the way we wrap our tefillin is different. We wear Rabbeinu Tam from before bar mitzvah age. Our talesim, both Katan and Godla, are different. In Chabad, the Rebbeim do not distribute shirayim. Our nusach is different, we dress differently than others, etc., etc. He is now in his formative years. How should I answer this? Thanks so much. Well, first of all, I would begin by saying that more things are common than different. There's a mitzvah, there's a Torah, the same Sefer Torah in the Aron Kodesh in Lubavitch or Chabad shul is like in every other shul in the world. And the Torah, of course, includes every letter, and down to this Taryag, 613 mitzvahs, 248 positive mitzvahs, 365 negative mitzvahs. It's the same Shulchan Aruch. We go by this, whether you start from the Rambam, or the Poskim afterwards, the Rosh, or the Tur, or the Beis Yosef, and the Ramah. And yes, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Alter Rebbe, if you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, there are chidushim, there are new things and more details, but it's all built on that which came before. So let's first put this in context. Lubavitch is not, God forbid, some type of new religion. Torah was given at Har Sinai, and Har Sinai, Torah B'Pirusha was given with commentary. This commentary was passed on to all Jews. And yes, it did diverge in different teachings, schools of Beis Shammai, the school of Beis Hillel, and Rav, the Asher the Rav, and Asher the Shmuel, different cities, according to the rabbis and the poskim and the ones that ruled, and that ruled the legal authorities of each particular and respective community. There's also, of course, the Maseda of Primis HaTorah, which was passed on also from Moshe Rabbeinu, Rashbi and Zoyar, and there's the whole Shalshalos of Primis HaTorah, all the way to Arizal, and from the Arizal to the generations afterwards, all the Baal Shem Tov, the Maral, the Shalah, the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the Magid, the Alter Rebbe, and then what we call Taamuz Chabad, the Chabad movement. But it's all based on, and not only based on, it's all in the Maseda, it's all in the path of Torah. And I want to dispel this myth and nip it in the bud. Lubavitch and Chassidus and Chabad is Torah. Torah connected to Torah Sinai. Does it have certain emphasis? Yes, the Baal Shem Tov emphasized, for example, V'ahavta Recha Kamecha, but it's not a mitzvah from the Baal Shem Tov. It's a mitzvah says the Klal Godel B'Torah from Pasuk Kedeshim, Simcha v'Samachta. That a person should be happy. Ivdu as Hashem b'Simcha. These are all themes of Torah, nothing new. The famous story of the Frierdiker Rebbe, what he told the German rabbis who came in delegation when he visited Berlin. They were in a hotel lobby and they asked him, Rebbe, what is the Chiddush of Chassidus? We are an Orthodox community for many years, and Chassidus didn't reach here. What did Chassidus come to contribute? And he looked around the lobby and showed them and asked them, what do you see? So it was a beautiful, exquisite lobby. They saw the most outstanding thing were these big, massive marble pillars. So they saw these pillars, they described the pillars. Then the Rebbe stood up, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and they walked behind him, and they went over to a pillar. He shined a lamp on the pillar. He says, "What do you see now?" So they started describing the intricate flowers and the intricate designs that were engraved inside the marble. Why didn't you say that earlier? Because from a distance, we only saw the pillars. When you look closely with the light, you start seeing the fascinating design, the flowers. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, exactly Chassidus. Chassidus didn't come to add anything. Chassidus illuminates the flowers in the marble of Torah mitzvahs. Pnimius HaTorah, Pnimius, the inner, the neshama. So the first thing you have to establish is that Lubavitch and Chabad is not coming to teach some new and different, God forbid, Yiddishkeit. It's Torah mitzvahs, and many things much more common than with all other communities. The Alter Rebbe, Neshama Chadosh, and Neshama Atzilus came, and yes, understanding the new challenges of our times, which is what, of course, leaders do, took the Shulchan Aruch and went through it, as the Maggid told him, is to write a new Shulchan Aruch. Not a new Shulchan Aruch in the sense new, but a more updated one, with the Barashenim and the Achreinim and the Poskim that came after the Shulchan Aruch HaMachaber, the Beis Yosef, and the Ramaz HaGos on it. And that's what he did. And as he did it, he reviewed. He also went through all the Nuschayos, many different versions in Tefillah, and wrote a Nusach Chabad, Nusach Hari, Nusach Chabad. Same thing with the Chalaf, in the using the Chalaf which we use for Shchita. Same thing with Mikveh, and so on. So it was not a new. So the fact that the people make the statement that Lubavitch does everything different, the Lubavitch perhaps has an emphasis, has a passion that may be different, but that passion comes from Chassidus, the passion of the Rabbeim in doing things not just mediocrely and not just by rote and mechanically, but with a very strong fervor and passion, which is the hallmark of Chassidus in general. Does that make him different? Yes, that Lubavitch, the Rebbe went and sent Shluchim and took the initiative, not just to build a community, a strong Jewish community, but to go out and help save Jewry, is unique. But there's nothing about it that's different than Torah. Torah says you have to be responsible for each other. That's what a leader does. So the fact that Rabbeinu Tam and so on, it's an emphasis on things to be able to strengthen. The Rebbe went and renewed Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. But Simchas Beis HaShe'eva is a custom that goes back all the way to the time of Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe spoke about Tu B'Av, about Zayin Cheshvan, days that some people forgot. But there's nothing new, there's all. Everything is within the framework of Yiddishkeit. So the newness is the emphasis, maybe the chayes, the passion, the commitment to make it exciting. Mashiach. Not one thing, Mashiach is one of the Yud Gimmel Ikrim, one of the 13 principles of Jewish faith. The Rebbe, many people say it's a Rebbe thing, it's Chabad. What's Chabad about it? Only thing that the Rebbe did was focus on making it like a tangible reality and not just an abstract faith, saying that it's in our times, because we're now in the Simonim of Ikrus and Mashiach, saying Deir HaShvi, the seventh generation, finished Avedis HaBerurim, and all else that the Rebbe spoke about. So my answer is a do-fall. First of all, more things common than not, and the things that are not is more the emphasis and the passion. And yes, in some areas, of course, Minhagim, for example, the Rebbe and Tov Schlomit started talking about Bein Tam. Until then, people would ask, should they put on a second period film? Then it became part of custom, just like Neshek for young girls. So the Rebbe said there's also, he was not Mechadish, something that many chugim, many communities did earlier. But the Rebbe saw more darkness, you add more light. You'll not find one additional, God forbid, mitzvah. The miftzayim are all mitzvahs that exist, but the emphasis on them, and to turn them into campaigns, turn them into very active and powerful initiatives, which, like now 50 years from Mitzvah Tefillin, Mitzvah Geres, but that's what a leader does. So a leader takes the Torah as is and tailors it and focuses it and emphasizes the things that need emphasis in the challenges of our particular time. That's how I would make the uniqueness. Is there Ksav of the Alter Rebbe? Yes, there is. But again, this is not about making us feel different or standing out. It's about an emphasis that the Alter Rebbe added and a certain hidurim that he added. In no way I should add, does this in any way belittle or compromise what other people do. The Rebbe very strongly emphasized that every community has its minhagim, and those minhagim are minhagi Kaddish, including how they dress, including other customs, and we respect and honor that and don't try to even change that. So that's how I would respond to that question. Okay. Specifics about differences that really deserves more time and different venue or more discussion on this. I'm just talking more in general. Next question. I'm specifically going to questions that are connected to Gimmel Tammuz, then I'll go to a few other ones. Mixing business and shlichus. Much of the day and mind space of Shluchim is consumed by covering the expenses of running a Chabad house. Is running a business on the side an appropriate way for a shliach to relieve some of the stresses of fundraising? If the sole aim of going into business is to help Chabad activities continue, should it be done? What does the Rebbe say about this matter? So I could answer to you first just one word. The Rebbe absolutely, categorically rejects this argument and says absolutely no. And there's a number of letters. Here's one I'll just read quickly. Again, if anybody wants these letters, please send us in our forum your email address. You must send us your email address or else we cannot contact you because it's anonymous. We have no idea who's writing to us. At meaningfullife.com/MyLife, you'll see there's a forum. Contact us, and I'll be happy to send you the copy of this letter. And the Rebbe writes in the letter the following. It's a letter dated 25th of Shvat, Tov Schlomit, 5735. That would be 1975. Your letter reached me with considerable delay. If you suggest ways and means to promote Lubavitch activities you suggest ways and means to promote Lubavitch activities on the West Coast. First of all, I want to thank you very much for your personal interest and desire to help these activities, as is evident from your letter. Speaking in generally, your suggestion that consideration be given to the possibility of operating a number of small businesses, which in addition to providing needed services would provide financial sustenance for the Lubavitch activities. It would of course depend on the local conditions as well as the availability of manpower, etc. It is feasible to implement such a plan. However, I wish to make some general observations which are applicable to all places where there are Lubavitch activities. Even assuming that there was a surplus of manpower which could be put into such business activity, it would be incongruous if both spiritual activities and business activities were carried on by the same organization under the same roof. It would surely not enhance the inspiration and total devotion which one usually associates with the activities of Lubavitch for the spreading of Yiddishkeit in any case. In any case, this would be an academic matter, and as much as we are unfortunately very limited in manpower, and it would be not right, of course, to take one away from spiritual activities and move them into business activities. There's a further general consideration. If one is to have the fullest impact and influence in matters of spreading Yiddishkeit, one must be entirely free from any possible suspicion, however far-fetched, that one has some material gain in mind. Such suspicion would be difficult to avoid if Lubavitch activities were related also to some financial activities, even for the purpose of funding the spiritual activities which are so vital. This point becomes more weighty in view of the fact that Lubavitch devotes so much time and effort to involve also Jews whose life in the past has been devoid of spiritual and religious activity. It would be hard to approach such a Jew and tell him that we are concerned only about his soul and spiritual life while conducting business on the side. To be sure, there are many universities and colleges who do have business investments which provide a substantial part of their budgetary requirements, but universities have to do only with imparting knowledge to the students. At any rate, this is their present function. Unfortunately, for one would have expected that these halls of knowledge would also be strongholds of morality, etc. Whereas our activities are entirely dedicated to matters of the spirit and character, etc. The above sufficiently explains our attitude. However, it is possible to add a further point, although it might appear rather strange to a businessman. One of the aims of Lubavitch is to involve the maximum number of Jews in its activities, and I mean to involve them as partners in such activities. Such partners can be of two kinds. Those who are qualified to teach and to influence others and work side by side with Lubavitch activists, and those who are not qualified or who are too busy, etc., and instead are able to contribute financially towards the Lubavitch activities, making them equal partners with the activists. Indeed, this is the old partnership of the two ancient tribes of Zvulun and Yisachar, where the former were primarily businessmen, supporting the latter who were primarily Torah scholars. As our sages explain, noting that wherever the two are mentioned together in the Torah, Zvulun is significantly mentioned first. I will conclude on this point, hoping that your participation in the work of Lubavitch is twofold, including both the part of Yisachar as well as the part of Zvulun. May God grant you that you should have atzlacha and go from strength to strength in both these aspects with blessing. And then there's a number of other answers from the Rebbe that clearly negate that possibility for these reasons and additional other ones. So that's the answer. I don't need to add anything. The Rebbe writes himself in the letter with all the, again, anyone wants the letter, just email us and give us your email information so we can respond. Okay, with that, let us go to a very different topic. Why is there so much stigma attached to mental illness? And this I refer you to episodes 50, 51, and 80 through 83, where this was discussed more at length. And here is the question. Why is mental illness more stigmatized than other illnesses? Mothers keep their children away from children with mental illness, but not from children who are physically ill. We've progressed by leaps and bounds when it comes to children with special needs and abuse victims. So why does it seem like we're still behind in undoing this demonization of mental and emotional disorders? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. First, I want to thank you for stepping up to the plate every week by answering the questions of Anash and Tamimim according to the Rebbe and Chassidus, especially in this dark time after Gimmel Tammuz when we are all looking for guidance and direction. I want to talk to you today about mental illness in the Frum community. For me, this is a personal and painful issue as I have friends and relatives suffering from this illness. I want to share two things I recently read and heard. Number one, I heard a lecture where a rabbi was discussing shalom bayis and basically said every marriage should be worked on besides where there is mental illness or severe abuse, and if you choose to marry someone with mental illness, you are a great hero. Number two, I read in a column of a prominent Jewish newspaper written by a psychologist basically stating the same as the above. Every effort should be made to have a marriage except where there is mental illness or severe abuse. To say I disagree with the above statements is an understatement. Firstly, I think it's wrong to group all mental illness into one category. There are many categories and conditions in mental illness, and some patients have a mild condition while others are severely ill. My point is, if someone's spouse suffers from mental illness, there are many options before divorce. For example, medication and or therapy. To make a blanket statement about divorce seems wrong, cruel, and unprofessional. Secondly, why is there so much demonization of people with mental illness? Obviously, it's a huge obstruction to regular life and a tragedy if someone has to live with it. But don't people with mental illness share the same humanity and feelings as everyone else in the world? The Ahavas Yisrael is clearly missing when it comes to how we treat people suffering from mental illness. I think the reason for the stigma in mental issues is the lack of understanding of it. When you see someone acting not regularly, the immediate reaction is to think he's a meshugana. However, when you understand the disorder, you see it differently. Some mental disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. For example, depression, which is caused by low serotonin levels, or some disorders are caused by circumstances of history of abuse, etc. My point is that this is an illness like any other illness. I think we have to help these people and encourage them instead of hurting them even more by alienating them. From my experience, the most painful thing for those that are suffering from mental illness is the stigma attached to it. The Jewish community made great strides in the acceptance of the weaker segments of our community. For example, we call the Down syndrome special. We accept them because we know that they're the same deep down. The same is true with child abuse victims, molestation. Up until a few years ago, such a victim wouldn't dare stand up and give a speech in public telling his or her story, but with the help of dedicated individuals, the stigma was removed from these victims. I hope you can discuss this topic on your next Farbrengen. Hatzlacha Rabba, v'yelchu machayil el chayil. Okay. As I said, this discussion has been had, we did discuss it episodes 50 and 51 and 80 through 83. But I'll address this as directly as I can. I agree with many of the points that you write, especially this type of blanket statements has absolutely no place. I don't see any professional ever making a blanket statement. You can say you work on everything. When it comes to mental illness, you may require particular skills and may need more professional intervention. But there's absolutely the correct to say that there are marriages that are happy marriages, not just compromised, not just the minimum, happy, successful marriages where one spouse or both spouses may have some issues. Remember that God created us all. We all have a pure neshama. The fact that someone may have diabetes or someone may have other diseases or illnesses, sometimes, like you said, chemical imbalance, it affects the mind. Why there's a stigma with that is pretty obvious, because it has that element of lack of control of the person. Someone has diabetes, you say, okay, fine, extra sugar in their blood, or other issues, and you even have compassion. Mental illness frightens us because it's much more mysterious, and the lack of control, both by the person who has it and others that witness it, is very, very difficult to deal with. because you don't have, you feel like we can't handle it. But let's go back. Any blanket statement is absolutely wrong. Each case by case. And yes, medication or therapy can work and does work. We've seen it, I've seen it, many people have seen it. The stigmatization does not help, because then the person may even minimize the symptoms, may not talk about it. There's cover-up and lying, and that always makes things worse. Facing it directly, talking to professionals discreetly and confidentially is the way to go. Now, there are illnesses that are very severe, and unfortunately, and they will affect the relationship. They will affect the marriage. But no one can make a statement that it's not going to work just because from a distance. You have to look into it and see what the issues are. If people are in denial and they don't want to deal with their issues, that's one scenario. If they want to deal with their issues, but it's still very severe, so people have to make choices. I have seen people who've loved and cared about their spouse, and even when they went through very difficulties, and that helped the marriage. But of course, it takes like any partnership, and it does test a marriage, and it will tax and put a lot of pressure and strain on a marriage and on a family. But when you go with a healthy approach, that we love each other, an approach that God is with us, and that we want the best and what's right, you usually are able to resolve many issues. Am I going to say that every issue can be resolved? We talked about issues that are extremely difficult to resolve, but it would be very irresponsible for me or anyone to just make a statement here that anyone can use and say, you see, this situation requires divorce. Divorce is the last resort, and many other factors have to come into play before we go to that place. And that cannot be done on a program online or in general anything from a distance. It has to be done face-to-face in a room where you see the people, where professionals are involved, where Rabbonim, Mashpim, whoever needs to be involved, that knows the people. And you have many answers from the Rebbe how to deal with that. You speak, and you're open to people who you trust, who are objective, who know Torah and Chassidus, and they will guide. I find that most problems that we can't get people to that place even. They just refuse to go there. They refuse to go to therapists, they refuse to go to mashpia, they either think they have it all figured out, and become their own worst enemy. That's usually the biggest problem. If you can sit down with humility and say, like all of us, we're subjective, everyone is, who's not? And I want to hear what an objective opinion is. Obviously with discretion and confidentiality, that's the approach to take. And then you go into each specific. So the stigma is not easy to just wipe away because we wipe it away. There's still stigma with abuse, by the way, because that's how it is. Most people, something a little uncomfortable, they just want to go, they don't want to be there. And you can understand it at times. However, we all have to learn that we're responsible for each other. And when you see, just like you see a crime, you can't look away. When you see someone suffering, whether it's the person himself or a spouse or family, we have a responsibility to do something with the right respect and the right, again, discretion and so on. You can't just come in like a battering ram, but you have to be able to not ignore it. There's a responsibility that you don't turn away from something you see that's a problem. That's in general. This includes this issue. Another thing I want to add is that someone's dealing with this. You must have professionals involved. Don't think you could solve problems yourself. If you're not trained and you don't understand the whole issue of mental and emotional challenges, then you must find people who do. I see sometimes people take it in their own hands and they think they can just resolve it and they create much more problems. So you must talk to people who understand it on a professional, on a medical, on a therapeutic or psychological level, and of course also on a Torah Chassidus level. That's my response. And stigma, I agree, is absolutely no place. But it's a sad thing. We're superficial people, and even when it comes to Down syndrome or other handicaps or other disorders, we tend to be afraid and uncomfortable with it. We must remember, as the Rebbe writes in letters, special children, and special adults for that matter, are neshamas, their souls, they're sacred souls. And a sacred soul should never, ever be disrespected. When we disrespect the neshama of Hashem, it doesn't matter what challenges they have, we're disrespecting God, we're disrespecting ourselves. Everyone has a tzelem elikim. Whether it's a Down syndrome child, whether it's someone who has bipolar, or someone who has schizophrenia, or any other depression or other illnesses that exist, Rahman al-Islam. The tzelem elikim is there. It is absolutely unacceptable for anyone to ever ignore or deny that. You could say, I can't deal with this. So fine. So find a way to find someone that can, or learn how to deal with it if you must, because you're a close relative or part of the situation. Become more sensitive. But we never, ever can abuse or in any way disrespect the neshama teherahi that every person has. And that's a critical component in this whole thing. Then there wouldn't be stigma. Then it's a question, okay, what do we do now to bring this neshama out with its challenges? We should have the compassion. Definitely not turn the person into pariah. And that definitely will help people also heal because they'll feel more comfortable to talk about it to the right people, because instead of people judging them and being afraid that their life will be ruined because if someone hears it, who knows what they'll do. So we have to learn to be more sensitive, more giving, more kind, and more compassionate. But again, beyond that, case by case, in every circumstance, to know how to deal with the particular challenges. Okay, so now let us go to a little more, not as sensitive topic. And that is, are we halachically obligated to protect the environment? Global warming and environmental protection. What is the Torah's approach to global warming? Are we held accountable for harming our environment? Is one halachically obligated to take active measures to protect the environment? After all, it is God's world. Shouldn't we be doing what we can to preserve its health? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, there's a lot of headlines about global warming in the light of USA withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty. I heard that the whole global warming idea is controversial. According to some, it is resulting of human influence on the environment, like CO2, carbon dioxide emissions, etc. According to others, it is suggested that planet Earth is going through cycles of warming and cooling, and there's no influence due to human contact on the environment. Okay, what is the Torah approach? Global warming, and are we held accountable for harming our environment? Practically speaking, should one try to buy low-emission vehicles, or is one halachically obligated to recycle? Thanks. Number 2, plastic. Disposable plastic waste is accumulating rapidly in our water, and besides for causing horrible deaths to fish, animals, and birds, ultimately they end up in our food and may cause adverse effects in humans. Why do frum people as a whole not care about these issues? Why isn't this plastic we use for convenience not considered bal tashchis and tsar balechayim toward animals, regardless of one's views on global warming? I'm interested to hear from a Chassidic perspective. Thank you. Signed, a cloth diapering Lubavitch. A cloth diapering Lubavitch. Okay, no plastic. I got it. So, my friends, this is a topic, firstly, that has been addressed by quite a few rabbis who are also study the science of the matters. I am not going to paskin here in the global warming debate and controversy. Firstly, I'm not equipped to do so. I could see, of course, that human intervention and our own industrialization and the emissions, whether it's carbon dioxide or it's due to gases and fumes and electricity and all the other air conditioning and so on, can definitely toxify the environment. We see pollutants. You mentioned plastic. We see that it's affected marine life. We see it affects different parts of nature. So, but the question is whether it's an irreversible scenario, whether nature has the power to respond and correct itself, whether it is really doomsday as some people paint it. We all know there's subjective arguments either way because there are people making business out of this environmentalism who may be investing in certain things that are environmentally sensitive. So I'm not taking away they may be doing good things, but to come to conclusions, I cannot. I could see arguments in both directions, and maybe nobody can come to a conclusion because we don't know. I remember in 1974, when I was graduating high school, they told us that by the year 1990, there would be no more food left on Earth. So we should be careful how much we eat and how much we throw out. Because according to scientific calculations, the fact is that there's only that much amount of food on the Earth. The population was growing, and by 1990, there'd be mass famine. It didn't happen. There is still famine, but famine is slowly diminishing, actually. There's plenty of waste, and it doesn't justify us continuing to indulge in throwing out so much food. But it didn't happen for whatever reasons. They said fossil fuels would be depleted by the year 1990 as well, because the calculation is it's physical. At the end of the day, resources are not infinite. But it seems to be continuing to pump. So my point is scientists don't have it all figured out. I'm not going to dismiss anything that everything they say is wrong. But I don't think this is the platform, this Chassidus Applied platform to come to make a psak, a ruling on this matter. But I will, in unequivocal and adamant way, say the following. I don't think there's anyone on earth, no scientist, no environmentally conscious, no vegetarian, no vegan, and so on, that is more sensitive to environment than the Torah itself. It is the Torah written thousands of years ago that makes it a clear prohibition, bal tashchis, as was mentioned in one of these letters. Bal tashchis means you're not allowed to destroy anything in this universe. We're not even talking about something major. The famous story with the Frierdiker Rebbe walking with the Rebbe Rashab, and they were taking a walk, and the Frierdiker Rebbe ripped a leaf off the tree. And the Rebbe Rashab reprimanded him, saying, this leaf has a trajectory of its own. What right did you have to rip it off a tree just to rub it for no particular purpose? That's the sensitivity. Bal tashchis applies to mineral, to vegetable, to animal, of course to the human being. Tzar Balachaim was mentioned. Same thing. This sensitivity is not just because we need the world because it's for it to sustain us. It's not just because we're sensitive to the cry of an animal or even the destruction of a tree, which of course is a prohibition as well, especially fruit trees, when you're talking about times of war and so on. It's because it's a divine world, and a divine world is sacred. Every inch, every fiber is sacred, which is why we're not allowed to mutilate our own bodies, which is not why we're not allowed in any way to tamper with the natural cycles of the world, because they are sacred. The fact that God created that we're able to consume a food is only because, as the Ikrim says and Chassidus cites, because we elevate by consuming the food, we elevate it to a higher level. If we didn't, we actually committed a sin, because you degraded a part of this world, took an apple off a tree, was not in any way transgressing God's will and turning it into energy that you used for something cruel. What right did you have to do that? The cobblestones Chassidic aphorism states, cry out when a wicked person walks on them. What right do you have to walk on me? I never transgressed. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says there are two reasons why Adam and Eve were created last. One is because of the creation. One, because if they're the crown jewel in the center of all of existence, because they bring the world to its fruition, they should have been created first. So the Talmud says two reasons, the Mishnah. One is because you first set the table and then you invite your special guest. Then there's a second reason given, that when a person sins, the Torah says, who do you think you are? You were created last, even a yitush. Even a lowly insect was created before you. Even a mosquito was created before you. So it seems like a contradiction, a special guest or even inferior to an insect. The answer is both. Depends how you behave. If you behave in a way that elevates the world and you use it for sacred purposes and you use it to make a better world and for kindness and virtue and mitzvahs and so on, then you're the special guest and everything is created before you for you to come now and elevate it. If, however, you use and indulge in this world, with whether it's in any way abusing the environment or anything else for your own selfish purposes, then even an insect was created before you. What right do you have to do that? I can elaborate on and on. So both from a halachic point of view, legal point of view, from a shkafa, from a philosophical perspective point of view, theologically, psychologically, and spiritually, we do not have a right to touch one fiber of this world, only with the conditions that you use it for that higher purpose, and the Torah gives those conditions, what to eat and how to eat and when. So the sensitivity to the environment is a sacred duty, not just one of convenience and one of preserving and not having a right to damage something else. But it's a sacred because you're touching God's sacred universe. With that, let us go to one follow-up, a short follow-up. I'll make sure I covered everything. We spoke about Chabad and luxuries, if you remember about the Yacht. A follow-up, so someone wrote a note. I spoke about Ekev Mem Zayin in last week's episode 167, the Sikha about the Rebbe, about the new way of spreading Yiddishkeit by taking an outing on a boat, on a yacht, and the lessons learned. So I spoke about a shliach who had written into the Rebbe. So the person here commenting that Sikha, Ekev Mem Zayin, the Rebbe spoke about a yacht. Mr. Chaim Yitzchak Spiegel from Los Angeles used to make dinners for Rabbi Levitansky on his yacht for around Chof of time. When he went by the Rebbe by dollars, the Rebbe said, "Der Mensch von der Schiffel," this man of the ship. So it's very possible that talk maybe was referring to both of them. That's how I would explain that. I don't see a contradiction. But thank you for that note. It's good to know for the record, historical record, to have all the details covered. With that, let us go to the Chassidus question of the week, and then we will do the essays. So here goes the Chassidus question of the week. What is the meaning of the concept of hiyuli? Hiyuli, often discussed in Chassidus. So yes, in Chassidus you'll find a language called hiyuli. Let's spell it. Hey Yud Vov Lamed Yud. In English, the transliteration would be Hiyuli. What is the meaning of this word? So, let's begin from the beginning. In Mefarshei HaTorah, and namely the Ramban, and the Bechai, they bring that word, and I'll refer to you strictly right in the pasuk Bereishis Bara, which is the first chum, Bereishis Aleph Aleph. The Ramban says like this. He speaks about Bria. The word Bara, he says, is a word refers to creating ex nihilo, something from nothing. He says, we don't have in Hebrew expression of taking of substance coming from non-substance, only the word bara. To bring something, we have many expressions that take one thing. Let's say you take from water, you make it ice, you freeze ice. But taking something that has no substance at all, efes hagomer as he puts it, and to turn it into something which has no substance, to turn it into something that's able to carry substance, that is bara. And what does it create? The first thing that was created was chemer harishin, was a shapeless piece of matter. So think of it like a shapeless clay that's not yet been structured. He says, Nikra liYevonim hiyuli. This is what was called by the Greeks hiyuli. So hiyuli is essentially, based on this, a shapeless state, like a raw piece of clay, a raw piece of gold, which is, after bara, God created hiyuli, this shapeless state, and from that he then shaped. So in the language of Chassidus, that could be bria, and then comes yitzira. Bara would be hiyuli, like a shapeless state, and then comes the shape, yitzira, that shapes it into something specific. So in that case, for example, vayikach ofamin hadoma, when God took earth from the ground, before he shaped it into the human being, it would have been a hiyuli state, and then it turns into a shape that looks like a human body as we know it. And then only yotzar. Once he created this state, this shapeless state, then he only had to do a shape, because he already established that first piece of substance. That's the Ramban. The Bechayai, on the pasuk on Toyu, he interprets Toyu. He says that's the chemer she'ein bei mamish. He says Toyu in the second verse of the Torah. Toyu. He says Moshe Rabbeinu b'Torah. He says, and there he says like chemer hazeh nikra b'loshen HaTorah Toyu or b'loshen HaPilosufim hiyuli. In the language of Torah, it's called Toyu, which we sometimes define as pust, empty, void. Toyu v'voyu is void, but Toyu. And b'loshen HaPilosufim, he calls them philosophers, is hiyuli. Often philosophers mean the Greeks. Now, boyhu, what's a boyhu then? Hu hatzura hanilbeshes lechemer. In that case, boyhu is the tzura, the shape that you begin to define the shapeless tayu. So it's similar interpretation here. However, when you look at Chassidus uses hiyuli. Hiyuli doesn't always refer necessarily to substance. Sometimes hiyuli is almost like an archetype, a potential state. So it's not even necessary. For example, when you say Yesod Hamayim or Yesod Ha'esh, we know that's not actual water or actual fire. It's the archetype of water, archetype of fire. So essentially, Chesed can be called hiyuli compared to Mayim. Chesed is the spiritual archetype called love. There's nothing physical about it. So it's not a raw water and then it shapes into the shape of water. And then a spiritual entity then evolves ultimately into a physical. We spoke about that we need a koyach habriya to turn into physical water. Same thing, Gvura and Eish. Gvura is an archetype, more of a potential. And from the potential comes the actual substance called fire. So there is a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, because it seems that hiyuli is not used in the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, and the Mittler Rebbe that introduces it. So there's a mimer, I'm looking now at a mimer, it's called So the famous Maimer, I believe it's, let me just see maybe make sure I'm right. It's called Lahavin Inyan Eidin Sof, one of the Lahavin Inyan Eidin Sof. This is one is printed in, it's a Maimer based on that's said by the Alter Rebbe, Pasha Shmois Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. That would be 210 years ago. And it's printed, here it's printed with additions. In Eira Teira in Yonim, page 165. So he says the following here. He says, Eira Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, he says, is a state of Ein Sof Mamash. Complete infinite state. And he brings Admur Marad, which is the Mittler Rebbe, Admur Marav Dev. He says, Liyesei Adayim B'chins Koyach Hiyuli, Dahainu Koyach Kloli, Hanimshach Meklolos Ha'atzmos. So the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, adds that what does it mean? That's the state of a koyach hiyuli, because it's still a koyach kloli, it's still a power, a all-encompassing general power that is drawn from klolos of atzmos, and the Friedrich, and he quotes the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe's language. Then he says at the bottom, at the end, the Tzemach Tzedek in his Agor, he says, "V'loshen hiyuli timtza be'etz chaim shar mem aleph pei Gimmel." There he says you find hiyuli in Eitz Chaim. What does he say there? There he kamoy hiyuli legaba arba. You say this. There he uses hiyuli as being the yesod ha'atzmi. That there's four archetypal elements: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, fire, wind, or fire, air, water, and earth. But then there's a koyach hiyuli, which is the koyach yesod, the God, which is all four originate from a hiyuli, which is a potential state. That's what he says there, from Keser. So Keser, compared to Chochmah Bina and Teferes and Malchus, are Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, and Keser is the source. Based on that, you don't have to necessarily say it's a physical raw matter. It can be a spiritual archetype or a spiritual potential state. But to not contradict between the two, it could really be both. Because when you explain it from the Ramban and the Bechai, the fact of the matter is that this is all in spiritual world, Keser and so on, and the spheres. But in physical worlds, how would that translate? That would translate into a raw piece of matter that is not yet fire, not even four archetypes yet. It's the archetype behind the archetypes. And that raw matter, that raw entity would become, that hiyuli would then become the archetype of fire, the archetype of ruach, of air, the archetype of water, and the archetype of ofer, of earth. So hiyuli at the end of the day is essentially a potential state. Either it's some substance that's raw and shapeless, or it's archetypal and essentially ethereal and not even having matter. It's only the potential, purely potential. But that's the translation of a hiyuli, and I give you some of the sources. You can look it up. And if anybody has something more to say on this, or a letter from the Rebbe that I may have missed, please send that in. And we move now to the final part of this episode, which is the essays. Continuing to read these excellent essays that came in this year's MyLife essay, Chassidus Applied essay contest. First one, Crowning the Queen, by Rachel Diamond, 49 years old, Beit Shemesh, Israel. Crowning the Queen, beautiful essay. I really enjoyed reading it. Based on the Pasuk of Mishlei, you should know God in all your ways. And the focus is, what are the ways of how a woman knows God? So it's basically a feminine approach to bringing God into our lives, into our homes and families, and really looks at how do we transform a woman being the Akeres Habayis is the foundation of her home. How does she transform the foundation of the home into a joyful mother of children? And she goes into detail how Chassidus teaches us how to do this. And using that, we all know that these garments, the three garments of Machshava, Dibur, Ma'aseh, can be used positively, thought, speech, and action, or negatively. In the challenge of raising our children, what principles could assist us in aligning these garments so that not only are we happy as mothers, but our children are happy too? It begins with a methodology, a detailed methodology using Chassidus and Kabbalah and different psukim about right and wrong, like the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, Shmeli tachas l'reishi v'yamini techapkeni. Your left arm is under my head and your right arm embraces me. How we apply that in our education of our children and in our building our homes, both focusing and accentuating the positive and battling the negative. And going through developing a sense of being lovable by learning to note acts of divine intervention in one's life. 2, restraining negative thoughts, speech, and behavior and reframing them positively. Removing the dafka thought that you have to dafka do it this way. Giving the benefit of the doubt. Don't condemn or compare. Separate the deed from the doer. Ultimate right and wrong are defined by halacha. Look for the good in all situations. Avoid labeling bad behavior, like lazy, selfish, uncooperative, messy. Judge favorably. Avoid insulting and hostility. Describe the situation factually. Keep silent if you can't be civil. Express love and appreciation as often as possible. Don't ridicule as it creates shame. Look for humor in the situation without putting the other down. She actually has case studies like incidents. Like if this happens, my school bag got dirty. I was upset, but mom washed it. What the thought is, what the speech is, what the behavior. How to apply to thought, speech, and behavior different challenging situations in family and home life. And summing up with a very solid bullets about seeking quality time with each child, developing your child's talents, and others which I'll allow you to read on your own. And that can be found at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And you'll see there the essays 2017. You subscribe to our weekly emails at meaningfullife.com, and we send out all these new essays as they are posted. Essay number 2 for this week, Trust, by Moti Shachat, 27 years old, London, United Kingdom. Another excellent essay where he uses trust, betachin. This article will present a fundamental concept in Chassidus that is relevant for all challenges, but in particular is applied when dealing with fears, worries, and anxieties. The concept of trust is discussed in pre-Chassidic works. This article will focus on the definitions and novelties as it is taught in the teaching of the Chabad Rebbes, and go through the clear definition of the concept as defined by Chassidus, the Chassidic approach to betachin, address questions which tend to challenge a person's ability to apply this concept, and 4, to offer practical suggestions to attain betachin in an authentic way. And goes through the challenges. I'm worried that it won't work out. I'm worried I will not succeed. The problems are great, but and anxiety is overwhelming. I know no inner peace. My constant nerves make me frail. And goes through an analysis, first of all, betachin in the Cheves Halavov Shar betachin, which is from Bechai, and then explains in Chassidus betachin in detail. Hope and trust and faith, trust and joy, and different questions and challenges and practical application, prayer and trust, and ultimately comparing that the cognitive modules and other modules out there in dealing with these challenges. While true betachin, on the other hand, not only offers peace of mind, but also lifts the spirits, inviting positive energy, anticipation, and excitement for real goodness to come. And finally, the third essay is the essay in Hebrew, Parenting Like a Gardener. The educator is like a gardener, according to Chassidus, and this is essentially establishing resources and tools for parents and educators who want to succeed in bringing up their children, and to produce and develop tools for them to have productive lives. I found this essay to be brilliant, to be honest. Excellent essay. An excellent essay comparing in detail the gardening experience with children, every aspect of the garden, the weeding of the garden, the planting of the garden, the nurturing of the garden. There are too many details for me to enumerate here, but essentially it all goes based on her experience. She writes, this is by the writer is Rachel Shaked, or Shaked probably, 66 years old, and she has an organization, okay, she clearly works in the psychological field, and Carmel Yosef, Israel. She says, based on her extensive experience working with criminals in prison, she learned all the mistakes that parents and educators make and developed a whole theory of how we avoid those mistakes from the outset. And she uses, as I said, the garden as an example, beginning with the Rebbe Rashab in Chanech Lanar, which was a tzavor he wrote for the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he compares the mechanech, the educator, to a gardener, and the student to a garden. And it goes through the details of how a garden is kept and made a successful garden, literally every detail. As I said, there's so many details here, I can't go through all of them, but I really thought it's an excellent essay in that sense, using this analogy and applying it to specific details of how reading this essay will definitely give any parent or educator tools to actually do preventive and proactive and preventive activities that will prevent and proactively create a healthy child, and avoiding the challenges that many of us have to face later on. And let's see here. Yep. As I said, it's quite extensive article, essay, and detail. So that again can be seen on the website, and I encourage you to read that. It's really good. Maybe we'll translate that into English as well. So with that, let me conclude in this pre-Gimmel Tammuz, MyLife Chassidus Applied. Gimmel Tammuz is a difficult day to talk about. We all know the original Gimmel Tammuz was, as you know, Shemesh Begiven Daim. That was the day when the sun was told to be silent by Yeshua, and it froze in heaven. And so he was able to finish the battle. So Shemesh Begiven Daim is in many ways a place that where many of us are. Something stopped. Something stopped. It sounds like the Rebbe stopped in a certain way. However, waiting and shining and waiting for us to do what we have to do. So we have two options. Either we don't do what we need to do, God forbid, or we do what we have to do. And then maybe the Shemesh will continue his journey. Not maybe, but for sure. So let us all use this day to the fullest, recommit, renew our contract, renew our commitment of iskashus and connection to our Shemesh, to the Pnei Moshe, Pnei Chama, and do our part in finishing the job that we were given in bringing the Geula through your Futza, through learning about Geula Mashiach, through learning Torah in general, and increasing in Kima Mitzvahs Behidur with Avedis Atfila, and above all, to bring it to our children, to our students, to everyone that we can reach. We should be zeiche that Gimmel Tammuz should end up being, just like it was by the Frierdiker Rebbe, the beginning of the Geula Hamitis V'Ashlema. And with that, we conclude this episode of MyLife Chassidus Applied, again dedicated to my dear grandfather by our good cousin, Chmiel Jacobson family, whose yahrzeit is on the 2nd of Taamuz. That is my grandfather. He should live and be long, my cousin Chmiel and his family. And until next Sunday, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. Everyone have a very blessed week and a blessed Chodesh.